Age of Empires 4 has just silently launched on the Xbox, and you might be asking, is it worth playing? Well, first things first. If you're looking for something in particular in this video, like what the game is, the positives, the howevers, or just my overall opinion, then feel free to jump to the timestamps below. Otherwise, let's jump into it. When it comes to strategy games, and especially real-time strategy games, you can't go past the Age of Empires franchise. For fans of Age of Empires 2, you'll be happy to hear that Age of Empires 4 feels like a true sequel to the second game. It covers the time periods of the early Middle Ages to the early Renaissance. In true AoE fashion, players normally start off with the town centre, where they will gather resources, construct buildings, upgrade technology, and create armies. The game has a range of win conditions that you set before you start. This can include the standard ones like taking out all enemy landmarks, holding the sacred sites that are in the middle, building a wonder and defending it, and there's also the special win conditions you can set. For people who haven't played before, the fun in Age of Empires comes from building massive bases and armies. It's like a game of chess where you use strategy to try and outmaneuver your opponent. So when it comes to the modes, Age of Empires 4 has a skirmish mode where you can play against AI or other players. It has an in-depth tutorial mode. It has a campaign with live action cutscenes and also a narrator that tells you the historical story as you play. And finally, a nice addition that we'd rarely see on consoles, the game also has a mod section where you can play modded maps and settings on the Xbox. But speaking about good features of the game, let's look at the reasons that make Age of Empires 4 worth playing. Let's look at the positives. It cannot be understated enough how much Age of Empires 4 feels like a true sequel to Age of Empires 2. The gameplay and the setting feel true to the Middle Ages. The game's aesthetic, the graphics, and overall atmosphere will feel familiar to a lot of people who grew up with the franchise. The game's new engine truly does make the settings and battles feel impactful. It never gets old to see cavalry thunder across the map at enemies and archers shooting volleys. But just as much as I'm praising this game for its similarities, it really is the differences that make it stand out enough to truly call Age of Empires 4 a sequel and not an expansion. As someone who's played a lot of Age of Empires 2 on Xbox, Age of Empires 4 feels like a different game. One of the major changes that most players may notice is that Age of Empires 4 has a severely reduced teams list with only 10 civilizations to choose from. However, I found this to be one of the game's strong points, because every civilization has its own unique playstyle and mechanics. Each civilization truly feels like a new experience. Just to name a few examples, you have the Holy Roman Empire who starts the game with a unit that can buff villagers. You can also produce more of them and station them around the base to help boost your economy. Now let's compare this to the Mongols, whose basic mechanics are completely different to any other civilization. So for the Mongols, they not only do not need to build houses, they can even pack up their buildings and move them across the map. They also can't build walls and do not collect stone. However, instead of collecting stone, they build a special building which provides bonuses to the buildings around it. Now this doesn't even mention all the unique mechanics of the Mongols, let alone all the ones from the other civilizations, like the Delhi Sultanate's scholar research system. And I give you these examples because Age of Empires 4 truly shines in creating unique mechanics for every civilization that make them all feel like a completely different experience. So in the game, the differences in civilizations goes beyond one team just building archers instead of infantry. You truly need to know their mechanics to win. Speaking of mechanics, one of the biggest changes to Age of Empires 4 is the new landmark system. So to level up to the next age, you'll need to choose between building two different landmark buildings. These buildings can have a major impact on the game and your playstyle. The importance of these buildings cannot be overstated. Some of the landmarks can allow for quick training of certain units, massive discounts to upgrades, or even massive economic bonuses. To allow for some flexibility, each civilization has two unique landmarks to choose from every age. Also, to add to their importance, landmarks count as mandatory buildings that must be destroyed to win the match. So these changes in the game mean a lot more player choice in Age of Empires 4, and provide a power spike that allow you to change your strategies. However, the changes that AoE 4 makes over 2 is more than just buildings and mechanics. It's also how the game manages pacing and its gold economy. An aspect that fundamentally changes the pacing of Age of Empires 4 over 2 is how it deals with the resource of gold. So in Age of Empires 2, gold is sparse. This is especially true endgame when battles would turn into what the community calls trash wars. This is when you build usually weaker troops that only cost the easily available resources of food and wood. To address this, Age of Empires 4 provides more buildings that allow for easier passive gold collection. This can include civilization buildings like the hunting cabin that gains gold based on its placement, and landmarks that auto-produce units. The game also added features like an NPC market that players can openly trade with. This means that matches will generally have stronger units for longer, which changes the battles and overall pacing. But with some of these overall game positives aside, let's get into a little bit more detail on the positives of the Xbox version. Okay, so one of the biggest positives of Age of Empires 4 Xbox version is, to put it simply, it works. My experience with the game is that it ran smoothly without any major issues, and that has included me doing 3v3 multiplayer matches. Just be aware though, performance may dip on the more bigger maps during the end game, but it's mostly stable for me. But performance aside, let's get into the other big part that most people are wondering, the controls. When it comes to the controls, for anyone who's played Age of Empires 2 on the Xbox, you may be happy to hear that Age of Empires 4 has the same controller layout, but with some major changes. For anyone who hasn't played a controller before, Age of Empires 2 and 4 are for me the gold standard of console RTS controls. They are intuitive and responsive, but most importantly, you can really see that the thought has been put into not only making the controls functional, but creating minor gameplay concessions to allow for a more enjoyable control experience. But you might be wondering, what do I mean by this? So for a lot of console RTSs, when they port the game from PC, they will just try to make the controller layout feel intuitive, and then maybe even add a pause button to make up for some of the gameplay issues that make controller play harder. However, where I really think Age of Empires doesn't get enough praise is when it tries to adapt gameplay to suit the console experience. So for Age of Empires, one of the major parts of gameplay that can create a lot of challenges for controller is the constant villager micromanagement. So this involves constantly building villages and sending them to the desired resource points. On controller, this process can easily take longer, especially when you're trying to scout the enemy, take objectives, and even expand your base. To try and alleviate this on console, the game has added multiple automation systems. So this includes the ability to set preset resource ratios that auto-divides your villages to collect those resources. And these presets are based on the most used builds in the competitive community. The game has also added the ability to toggle on auto build villages and has a build radial where you can look at a certain spot, place a building, and the closest villager will walk over and build it. This makes a massive difference in allowing you to focus more on the battles and planning. Another addition to try to make it easier on controller is that they've added a find feature where you can look for certain buildings. So while for more competitive matches, it's actually more efficient to control your villagers yourself. However, as the game progresses and your villager count rapidly increases, there's a huge benefit to allow the game to manage your resource collection. Speaking of positives, one of the best areas of Age of Empires 4 is its in-depth tutorials that not only allow step-by-step narration on how to play, but also provides the Art of War tutorials that provide guidance on the more advanced endgame tactics. But before I go on to the whoever section, I can't forget the best part of Age of Empires 4 is you can now put archers onto the wall. 10 out of 10. I really do love how you can put archers onto the wall. Anyway, however, a massive improvement for Age of Empires 4 Xbox version is the amount of customization that you can change in the settings. But this is the whoever section. And in saying that, however for the game is some of its preset selections. As you can probably see on your screen, and you can't miss it, the preset HUD display is probably one of the worst I've seen in a long time. It takes up a large portion of your screen, and talking about presets, the camera movement speed is shockingly slow. However, like I mentioned before, these are easy fixes in the settings. But another part of the game that leaves me with questions is some of the control choices, particularly some of the choices that they left out. The two major controls that I found I missed in Age of Empires 4 is the auto scout feature and pressing the Y button to build a house. As it can make sense to remove the building house feature as it's less impactful in endgame, the auto scout feature I really missed. This is when you could click one button and your scout would automatically explore the map for you. This allowed you to focus your time on building your base and economy. While the new feature to auto build villages may save you some time, you will now spend that time juggling between giving your scout orders and managing your city, because it feels like auto scouts may be another step forward in helping bridge that gap between keyboard and controller, and especially because the Xbox version has keyboard and mouse support. However, to make scout navigation easier, you can queue multiple commands, so then you can set them and go back to your base. But speaking of bridging the gap, one of the major parts newer players should be aware of is the game's skill gap when playing. At the start of Age of Empires 4 on controller, it can take a little bit to learn. It's simple enough to understand its basic mechanics, however, there's a bit of a skill jump between some of the more complex controls, like the find feature, unit group management, and some civilization mechanics and playstyles. However, as someone who's played the franchise before, I found the tutorials helped a lot. So overall, when Age of Empires 2 launched on console this year, I was surprised on just how well the game was adapted for the controller. So, it shouldn't be surprising that when it comes to controls and gameplay, they have done it again with Age of Empires 4 Xbox Edition. It truly is a game that is worth playing for any console RTS fan. It provides the same experience as PC players with its campaigns, AI skirmishes, multiplayer, and even a selection of mods. It is a game that shows an RTS can work on a controller when the developer takes into consideration the core gameplay mechanics. So if you're looking for a real-time strategy game, or even a medieval game on Xbox, then Age of Empires 4, which is also available on Game Pass, might be the game for you. Thank you for listening and please subscribe.